According to Aristotle, rhetoric may be defined as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion, using all available means of persuasion. And we're going to talk a lot about Aristotle in this third part. This is part 3, methods of persuasion. In our methods of persuasion, listeners are persuaded by one or more of 4 reasons. And I know we only have 3 guys listening here, and I'll explain in just a second, but one or more of 4 reasons will persuade your audience: credibility, evidence, reasoning, and emotional appeal. Aristotle called that ethos, pathos, logos. Not necessarily in that order, because mostly ethos, logos, pathos is in this order. Let's explain. Ethos, or credibility, is the audience's perception of a speaker's competence and character. You need to explain to your audience why they should believe you. You're going to do it through competence, explaining your competence, explaining your character. Hopefully they know you, or maybe they don't know you. You're going to explain why they should believe you, and you need to tell them, right, up front. Here's why. Here's what I've been doing. Aristotle called this ethos, okay, credibility. It is situational. You're going to be credible in some areas and not so credible in others, and it can fluctuate. So I just want to make clear that it is not a constant, okay? There's initial credibility before the speech. There's derived credibility that comes during the speech, and there's terminal credibility, which comes at the end of the speech, which sounds like a horrible disease, but it isn't. What do you have? I have terminal credibility. So I know you've been in a situation before where you see a speaker, maybe on TV, maybe live. They look credible. They've dressed the part. You think, oh, this person's going to have a lot of great things to say. Then they get up there and open their mouth. So the initial credibility is very high. Then they start talking, and credibility starts to wane. And by the end, you're like, oh, that person had no idea what they were talking about. Or hopefully it goes the other way. You see a speaker, try not to prejudge, but maybe we do. You go, what are they going to be able to tell me? And then they start talking, and you go, oh, well, they do know what they're talking about. They have credible sources. They know what they're talking about. And by the end, they're very credible. It could go either way. And so just know that credibility fluctuates. It is not a constant. It does change. And so you need to make sure that you are explaining your competence and character, and that you are doing things honestly and with great ethical persuasiveness. And then hopefully at the end, your audience finds you terminally credible. Terminal credibility. To enhance your credibility, make sure you explain your competence. I've already said that. Establish common ground with the audience. If they can know that you have a connection with them, they're more likely to then go, okay, what do you have to say? We have something in common. Speak expressively and with conviction. Okay, 2 different things. Expressively. How would speaking expressively tell them that you know what you're talking about? Well, if you've practiced and you know what you want to say, and you can say it clearly and you can say it well, then they see that you care enough about this topic that you practice for it and you know what you want to say and you have passion for it. With conviction means not only do you have passion for it, but you also believe it. So with conviction means you're not just trying to persuade them of something you made up. It's something that you're just doing it just because, but you truly believe what you're saying with conviction. Second, we have logos. Aristotle called it logos. So we're breaking into 2 parts. Logical appeal. It's an attempt to prove an argument or persuade an audience through the use of logic, reason, data, facts. Aristotle called this logos. We break it into 2 parts: evidence and reasoning. Evidence is all the supporting materials you're going to use to prove or disprove your claim. Lots of sources, lots of data, not just opinion. You need facts, you need data, right? And then reasoning. You're not just going to lay the data out there and go, I know, there we go. The data speaks for itself. No, never let the data speak for itself. You need to draw a conclusion. You need to take your audience from, here's the data in A, and here's the data in B, and therefore it means data in this result in C. Take your audience from A to B to C. Draw that conclusion based on your evidence for them. Don't just go, there's the data, I think it speaks for itself. It never does. You need to speak for the data. So make sure you have the evidence and the reasoning. So we have ethos, logos, ethos being credibility, logos logical appeal. We'll get to pathos in a bit, but first let's talk about what happens when there is an error. in reasoning. Oh, wait, sir, sorry. First, tips for using evidence. Make sure you use specific evidence. Don't just say most of the people believe. No, no. Give statistics on how many people believe that thing. Use specific evidence. Use novel evidence. Make sure it's new. When I was in school, it was you were lucky if you got data that was 10 years old. That was like the newest data was like 10 years old. By the time I got to college, they had broken that window down to, okay, you need data that's at least only 5 years old, right? And then now with the internet and everyone online and data in our pocket, you can get information that's hours old. So use the newest information you can find as evidence. Don't use old, outdated data, okay? Use it from credible sources. There's a lot out there. You don't quote someone's blog. No, anybody can have a blog. Everyone has an opinion. Don't quote opinions unless it's some scientist or expert in the field then that's done actual research, not just making stuff up. Use credible sources. Go to a scholarly peer-reviewed journals, not just self-published works. Make sure you're using credible sources. Go back and review our chapter on research and credible sources. And use credible sources. It's not going to do you any good to have prepped all this and then use the Weekly World News. Make clear the point of your sources. Don't just throw out a lot of data and not explain what it means, especially statistics. When you start listing them off, it can be very confusing for an audience. So make sure you explain what the statistics and data, what it means. Make a clear point of it. There are types of reasoning. So when you look at inductive reasoning, you're moving from a specific example to a general claim. If you're looking at deductive reasoning, it moves from a general principle to a claim. And then if you're looking at causal reasoning, it tends to establish a relationship between a cause and effect. So just know that there are different types of reasoning as well. When there's an error in our reasoning, it's called a fallacy. So we can't talk about persuasion without talking about fallacies of persuasion. So there are 10 here. There are many more. There are more listed in textbooks and on websites that it could have gone, this could just been one whole PowerPoint, one entire presentation on fallacies, but I didn't want to go that far. So here's 10. Let's look at these. So hasty generalization, false cause, invalid analogy, bandwagon, red herring, ad hominem, either or either or, slippery slope, appeal to tradition and novelty, or appeal to authority. So let's break each of these down. I want you to remember to avoid using these as a speaker and don't be persuaded by them as a listener, an audience member, a consumer, or a voter. In an election year, you're going to hear every single one of these. So be careful and be able to call them out and go, that's a false cause. That's a slippery slope. That doesn't make any sense. So be aware of these as a consumer of information and don't fall for them and don't use them. Okay, not ethically sound to be using known fallacies. Let's break these down. A hasty generalization is when you draw a conclusion about a population based on a sample that's way too small. There's not enough information. It jumps to a conclusion based on insufficient evidence, and it usually rests behind a stereotype, right? So when you say, oh, well, all of those people are like that, that's a hasty generalization. Here's an example. The 2 people I spoke to in Paris were nice, so all the people I meet in Paris will be nice to me. No, you're taking a specific instance and generalizing it to a larger idea, and that is not true, okay? Nothing against Parisians, they're great, but you can put any space in there, any location, and that would not be true, right? So avoid hasty generalizations. False cause is when you mistakenly assume that because one event follows the other, the first event caused the second one. It attempts to create a causal relationship between 2 things that may have nothing in common. It relies on the most obvious rather than actual data. So whatever's close by or that person or whatever it is that's the most obvious rather than actual data. And it might lead to myths and superstitions. So I had to put this one in here for an example. Every time I wash my jersey, our team loses. So I'm not going to wash my jersey anymore. You've probably heard a lot of those kind of myths and superstitions about ball players who don't wash their socks or don't wash their jersey or whatever it is because it's helping them win. That's a false cause. You winning or losing has nothing to do with the amount of dirt on your clothing, okay? So false cause. Invalid analogy is when you're trying to compare 2 things that essentially are not alike. They may have one characteristic that's alike. When you say it's apples and oranges, This is an invalid analogy. Now, apples and oranges have one thing alike. They're both fruit, but essentially they are not alike. They grow on trees and they're fruit. That's about the extent of it. They taste different, different kinds of texture, all of those things. Here's an example. Employees are like nails. This is an extreme example. Just as nails must be hit on the head to get them to work, so must employees. Obviously, that's not the same. That's not the case. And it's an extreme example, but it's invalid analogy. Those two things are not alike. You can't compare them. Okay. The bandwagon. Your mom knows about this one. Don't jump on the bandwagon because something is popular, it is good or correct. But mom, everybody's doing it. Or, but mom, everybody has one. And she will say, well, if everyone jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Right? That's the bandwagon. It's when you try to validate a point by suggesting that everyone else either believes or purchases or supports this, and you should too. So don't do this and don't fall for it. You should get the new iPhone. It's the best-selling phone right now. Everyone likes it. That's getting on the bandwagon. Everyone else does it. You should too. Bandwagon. Avoid it. Don't fall for it. The red herring. Now, I've seen two different explanations about a red herring. If you're wondering about what a red herring is a fish. And the story I've always heard or read is that English farmers would drag a red herring around the edge of their crops so that when the fox and the hounds came through, if the fox ran through the crop, that the scent would be, the hounds would be thrown off the scent by the scent of the red herring. That's what I always thought. And in that vein, it means an irrelevant issue aimed at diverting attention away from the actual subject. So if someone brings something up and you divert away from something else to something else, that's a red herring. It's used to deceive or confuse the audience or the opposition while simultaneously making the original subject seem less important or less significant. You see it a lot in social media posts to attract readers, like clickbait. They'll make it look like it's one thing and then it's a red herring and you're looking at something else just to click through their site. So it's everywhere. For example, we can't raise salaries, but we still provide great benefits to our employees. Let's talk about benefits. How about salaries, right? So it's a red herring. We try to divert attention by changing the subject to something else. Ad hominem is Latin, and it means literally against the man. It's an argument is rejected on the basis of some irrelevant fact about the person presenting the argument. Usually comes in the form of name calling or personal attacks. This is the mudslinging that happens during an election year. They start, instead of talking about issues, they just start calling each other names or bringing up personal things. That's ad hominem. Avoid that. Avoid it. If you can't debate someone without name calling, you really don't have a point, do you? So avoid ad hominem. The senator voted for the tax increase. It's not hard to understand why when you consider he's a millionaire and has never had to worry about money. Well, that's in today's world, that's a very mild ad hominem, but it's still ad hominem. It's still diverting attention away. It's still making a personal attack. It's still name calling. It's trying to distract from the issue at hand. What is the actual issue here? Okay, so don't get fooled by ad hominem. Don't use it. Don't fall for it. Depending on how you pronounce it, either or either or. This fallacy tries to make you think there's only two choices. Speaker tries to convince the audience there's only two sides to an issue, one right and one wrong, and there are no other choices. It forces the choice between two alternates when more than two usually exist. In this world, there very rarely are only two options. It's not really a black and white kind of world. It's not all or none. So, for example, the government must either raise taxes or eliminate services for the poor. Well, that's not how the budget works. It's not all or none. Like, you can keep taxes where they are and still not have to eliminate services. So there are other alternates, but this statement makes you think there's only two options. So don't use that and don't fall for it. Slippery slope. This one makes you think that if you take the first step, all the other steps will just be unavoided, can't be prevented, and it's going to lead to just terrible consequences. Okay. So if you take that first step, it's all downhill from there. It's going to be awful. It's never used in a positive way. Once we start, eating healthy, the next thing you know, none of us will have heart disease. It's never used in that way. It's always a negative for some reason. Here's an example. If we legalize marijuana for recreational use, soon we will all be on heroin. That's not how that works. So don't fall for the slippery slope and don't use the slippery slope. avoid that slippery slope. Now there's some appeals we need to talk about. This one I've combined with appeal to tradition and novelty because they're opposites, but I'm gonna put them all on one slide so you make sense. Appeal assumes that because something is old or new, it's automatically better than the other thing that's new or old. So it's always been this way, is that appeal to tradition. We've always done it this way. It's always been this way. It must be right because it's been here forever. And then in the novelty way, we've got to keep up with the latest trends. We've got to keep doing the new thing. New is always better. And so you have this appeal to tradition, which is we should always do it this way, the way we've always done it. It's old, so it's better. Or the appeal to novelty, which is it's new, so it's better. So I'll put both of those on the same slide. Here's an example for novel appeal to tradition. Our company has always used this software, so there's no need to consider newer options of software that updates every year or so. No, you should. And then example for appeal to novelty, the Star Wars sequels are better than the originals because they are newer. Really? Not necessarily. So don't fall for these and don't use them. Okay. And then the last one I want to add is appeal to authority. This happens when it assumes that because the authority person supports or claims something to be true without any evidence, that it must be true. Okay. This comes a lot with like celebrity endorsements and famous people saying that you should buy this product or do this thing. It arises when the authority is not genuinely qualified in the subject or when the appeal relies solely on their word. That's appeal to authority. So don't fall for this one and don't use it either. Peace is the best strategy because Einstein said so. Well, peace probably is the best strategy, but Einstein was not an expert in peace negotiations, so probably not the best idea to use Einstein for peace governing. So those are the 10, actually 11 if you count this extra one, 11 fallacies or errors in reasoning that you want to avoid. Don't forget to not use these as a speaker. Don't use these, and don't be persuaded by them. As a listener, as an audience member, as a consumer, as a voter, don't fall for these. These have no evidence and no reasoning to back them up. Don't just fall for fallacies, okay? All right, the last part, we talked about ethos, we talked about logos, now we get to pathos, emotional appeal. This is a persuasive method that seeks to evoke or awaken emotions in the audience. It's an emotional appeal. Aristotle called this pathos. So if you think about the root for pathetic, I know that's not a good example, but pathos is awakening some emotion, some emotional appeal. Could be happiness, could be pride, could be patriotism, whatever it is, bringing in emotional appeal. Here's some tips for using emotional appeal. Use emotional language for your emotional appeal. If you need to, go back and read our chapter on emotional language, on language use, and use emotional language if you're going to do an emotional appeal. Develop very vivid examples for your emotional appeal. Make sure you speak with sincerity and conviction that you believe what you're saying, and then use emotional appeal ethically. You're thinking, what? Ethically? Yeah. Don't use emotional appeal if it's not appropriate to your topic. Don't just use it willy-nilly. And then don't substitute emotional appeal for evidence and reasoning. Don't spend your entire persuasive speech telling us sad stories that pull at our heartstrings and not give us evidence and reasoning and data to back up your claims, okay? I think a really good speech will have all of these. They'll have ethos, your credibility and character. It'll have logos, your evidence and reasoning, and it may even have some pathos with an emotional appeal or a great story to tell. But don't just use emotional appeal. It's draining to your audience. Not everyone is is high in empathy. Not everyone is high in sympathy. Some people want analytical data. You've got to give them information. So you have to think of all of these when you're going to persuade your audience, okay? All right, part 3, our summary. We looked at the methods of persuasion. We looked at ethos, logos, and pathos. We looked at credibility, evidence and reasoning, and emotional appeal. We looked at the fallacies or the errors in reasoning, and I give you tips on using each method as you are crafting your persuasive speech, okay? And now, just like Lin-Manuel Miranda, who spoke in front of Congress, you are ready to go persuade.